In about 2 months, the US is expected to revoke the GSP benefits to India. Now, what exactly is GSP? How badly will India be hit in the entire trading system between India and the US and otherwise? I have with me Rajat Kathuria of the International Council for Research in International Economic Relations. He's obviously an economist and a specialist in trade issues. Mr. Kathuria, can you explain what is GSP and how badly will the US threat hit us?
So GSP is the Generalized System of Preferences, and it's been around for more than 3 decades. And it is a benefit of duty-free access that the US has given to certain developing countries, including India. There are certain sectors and items that are listed under the GSP, and we continue to get benefit out of zero tariff access in the US market. Of these, there are various sectors, as I said, that were covered, including gems, jewelry, auto components, and so on. Now, the threat to withdraw GSP from India has been discussed for the last, at least 3-4 months already. And I think, on balance, we have to seriously consider whether we want to continue to be a GSP country or not, because I guess the transactions costs have to be analyzed, what it takes to be in the GSP, and then take a call whether it makes sense, economic sense for India to be there. And the reason I'm saying this is these periodic sort of threats to withdraw and ask for other reciprocal benefits to continue being a GSP country may or may not be worthwhile, and we have to analyze that. And we are actually in ICRIER, we are doing that sort of a study where we would look at what it would mean and for what sectors, what it would mean for the withdrawal of GSP. And that study should be out. So at the macro level, we know that the Ministry of Commerce has put out some numbers. At the macro level, we know that $5.6 billion of our trade, which is roughly slightly more than 10% of our trade, is covered under GSP. And of that, as a result of withdrawal, we are going to lose $190 million. This is what the Ministry of Commerce has said. And there has to be a method by which they've calculated this $190 million. Whatever the method that has been used, what it essentially means is that either the price in the US of these items will increase if India continues to export them, or some of the SMEs that export these items will have to absorb that price increase and continue to sell it at the same price, or at least absorb a part of that increase. Now, this sort of an analysis yet has not been done, and in the interest of sort of identifying the sectors, I think it would be relevant to have these numbers on the table. But at a macro level, GSP is something that is unilaterally given by a developed country to a developing country. It's a benefit that they've unilaterally given to India.
So we are going to the WTO. Does it make sense?
It's a unilateral benefit. It's not a multilateral feature. So I would say we have to look at if we go to the WTO on this dispute settlement, then I don't think we have a chance of winning. It may just be a threat.
So when we look at the US threat, what is it that they want in return? I presume that's what this is all about. There's something they want.
So they're using a unilateral tool for reciprocal benefits, right? Okay. Which was not intended in the beginning. Yeah. But given the state of global trade, you're trying to, and in an increasingly protectionist world, you're trying to get any sort of benefit based on any instrument that you have. But technically, GSP was not used to garner reciprocal benefits from other countries. So what they are probably, there's a whole series of incidents, or what the Americans would call incidents in the Indian market, that could have triggered this reaction from the Americans. One, of course, was Harley Davidson case, motorcycle case, many months ago, where we had increased tariffs on the import of Harley-Davidson motorcycles. And then last year, there was, at the end of last year, we had an e-commerce policy that was in favor of the domestic manufacturers or domestic e-commerce providers. And then we had data localization as well. And then we came out with a renewed e-commerce policy just a few months ago. Then the capping of the prices of medical devices in India. And then, of course, dairy. So I think all of these sort of cumulated into an action, into the action that President Trump has initiated in the United States.
So in the event Trump goes ahead with his threat, say a sector like dairy, for instance, you think that will be hit by the kind of competition coming in from the US?
I think we are willing to negotiate. What I understand, I think we are willing to negotiate on pharmaceutical devices, on medical devices. Dairy is politically sensitive in India, and I don't think the government will want to negotiate on dairy. Although, the kind of dairy products that the United States would presumably export to India, both in terms of pricing and in terms of the market that they serve, may not really hit the Indian producers as much. But then dairy is a politically sensitive sector to sort of negotiate, especially with respect to a GSP. Right? I mean, as I said, it was a unilateral benefit. But the government of India, I think, would be willing to negotiate on pharmaceutical devices, on medical devices, stents and so on. I mean, there is now, there's a lot of research that has been done after the capping of the pricing of medical devices, etc. And a lot of the benefits have been, captured by consumers. And we know that there was a lot of profiteering that was happening, at least anecdotally, a lot of profiteering that was happening. So this move, although in a market, you would say, which is competitive, why would you want to cap prices? But unfortunately, the market for medical devices was not competitive in the sense, even if there were a large number of players, when you're in a hospital, when you're in an environment in a particular hospital, that hospital becomes a local monopoly, right? It's not that you're choosing between stents of various manufacturers. That hospital is a monopoly, is exercising monopoly power. And so I think there was market failure in the pricing of medical devices. But having said that, I think we would be much more willing to negotiate with the Americans on medical devices and less willing to negotiate on agricultural market access.
But when you look at Western pharma companies, they've been accused even in their own home countries Absolutely. Of overpricing.
Absolutely.
So for all you know, by relaxing our own standards and allowing them in, we are opening ourselves for more trouble.
So, I mean, I don't know what route the negotiations would have taken, whether we would have sort of agreed to remove the caps that we've imposed on the medical devices. But my sense is that our willingness to negotiate on medical devices would have been relatively more than willingness to negotiate on dairy and agriculture, because I think that remains a sensitive sector in India. We've had similar sort of discussions, issues raised with respect to competitive agricultural countries like Australia and New Zealand, which we are negotiating FTAs with. And one of the stumbling blocks there as well in the FTA in the past has been dairy, has been agriculture, because they are competitive agriculture economies. And that is a sector which is politically sensitive, and I don't blame the government for being sort of defensive about this. And the reason is that, we still continue to support a large number of jobs through agriculture. Maybe there's a lot of disguised unemployment in the agricultural sector, but politically, so the optics would be detrimental, even though, as I said, the impact on the local farmers or the local producers may not be that high. And obviously, we could do analysis to figure out, if we do liberalize dairy, what the impact and where the impact would be felt. but politically, for the optics, it becomes difficult for India. So we have to make our agriculture a lot more competitive, and ICRIER has done a lot of work in that regard, investments in irrigation, investments in extension, improvements in seed quality, better information for farmers, using information technology, etc. All of that. And I think our agriculture could also become competitive. And then we'll be on a much stronger footing to be able to then negotiate with other countries.
Now, President Trump has at some point, I recall, referred to some kind of an FTA they're negotiating with India. Is this correct?
So I think that's been put on the back burner. FTA with India, almost a decade and a half ago, but that's now on the back burner. We are negotiating FTAs now with, or in the process of negotiating FTAs with New Zealand and Australia.
And that brings me to RCEP,
right?
Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. Where are the negotiations at this point?
So even as we speak, ICRIER is one of the institutes that has been chosen by the government, selected by the government to do an analysis of what it would mean for India to be in the RCEP and what the impacts will be. So we are in the process of studying that. And I think the initial reactions that we are getting from the stakeholder discussions that we've had so far, and this is also out in the public domain, that the impact on industry, if we do negotiate the RCEP and we are in the RCEP, the impact on industry is going to be felt as a result of, mostly as a result of the Chinese inclusion in the RCEP, and whether our industry is strong enough to compete with Chinese manufacturing. As it is, we are running a very large trade deficit with China, especially in the electronics component sector. And as a result of tariff lines being liberalized in RCEP, one could expect that deficit could go up with China. And it remains to be seen how much of market access we can get in China, how much we can price open the Chinese market within the RCEP negotiations in areas of our competitive advantage, which really is, services. But RCEP is not looking at services in great detail. It's just focusing on manufacturing.
I think in every FTA negotiation, we've stumbled on services, isn't it?
Right. I mean, services, we've stumbled on services, especially in one aspect of services. Outsourcing and movement of natural people, which is mode 4 under the services negotiations, which is, our workers going abroad and delivering services abroad and working abroad for limited periods of time. Under the WTO, the terminology is movement of natural persons, like the H-1B visas, etc. And we've constantly and consistently asked for increased access in other countries for mode 4 liberalization.
So RCEP is not looking at services?
So this, right now, the negotiations are focused on manufacturing and tariff reductions in goods.
So it could go on to services at some point?
At some point, but presently it's focusing on goods.
But the FTAs we have with some other ASEAN countries?
There are services are negotiated, like with Singapore. There are chapters for services in the FTA. There are chapters for services in the Japan SECA that we have, or SEPA, and even in the Korean agreement, we have a chapter for services. But those have been negotiated in the past, 2010, 2012, and there are time now for the review of those agreements. But in general, there has been a lot less progress in services negotiations than there has been in goods negotiations.
So people basically don't want Indians coming in and taking their jobs, is that it?
Labor movement becomes very sensitive. goods movement is much easier. Although if you look at the theory of international trade, and if you read the great Paul Samuelson, he would say goods trade is a substitute for factor trade, right? Because your factors are embedded in the goods that you're exporting or importing, right? So there's a factor price there, there's a wage, there's a capital embedded in the trade for goods. But of course, I mean, at a negotiating level, you would want, if that's the area of your competitive advantage, then you want to price open those markets. You know, for example, the United States has a big advantage in the financial services sector. And they've always wanted our financial services sector to open up. Our competitive advantage remains in IT, especially in providing services in those countries through movement of labor. And that's what we've asked for. But that's more difficult to open and has been relatively more difficult to open than the goods markets.
So last question. We seem to be not very competitive in a lot of areas, whether manufacturing or trading. What is the problem?
I think, you know, competitiveness in India is, or lack of competitiveness in sectors, is due to a number of issues. I mean, some people say that our exchange rate has been overvalued, but now it is depreciated in the past few months. But there are many other reasons why our you know, industry complains of being not as competitive, and the reasons are, you know, power supply, your movement, logistics costs, you know, movement, port facilities, etc., and even trade facilitation to an extent. And ICRID is working on trade facilitation. What happens if your, you know, clearance, for example, at a port in Singapore or in China takes place in a couple of hours or max a day? We take much longer for that, and that adds to costs. Our logistics costs compared to other countries are high, and that's why this ease of doing business is so much of a focus in our, you know, transformation or a development, because that will enable us to become sort of more competitive. And our lack of competitiveness exists even though if you're just looking at China, our labor costs are still much lower compared to China. China is now becoming a high-wage country, and some of the businesses that are exiting China should have come to India naturally because of the size and population, and then using India as a base for exports. Some of them have come, but a lot of them have gone to countries that you wouldn't have expected a few years ago to attract that kind of investment. And I'm speaking here about countries like Vietnam. They've been able to attract that investment. So we know what the sort of reasons for the lack of competitiveness are, and I think implementation of policy interventions would then enable us to bridge that gap. And I hope we are able to do that sooner than later, because RCEP is going to happen. Now, at what terms, one doesn't know. RCEP will happen, and if we are in there, whatever terms are negotiated, then it's best that we are prepared and ready to face the competitive pressure, not only from China, but from some of the other countries that are in RCEP.
Mr. Kathuria, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Likewise. And thank you for that insight.
Thank you.